The modern phenomenon of the escape room is a massive industry, locking people into meticulously designed physical spaces where success hinges on lateral thinking, observational skills, and solving sequential logic puzzles. While the concept seems modern, its core mechanics, the confined setting, the heavy reliance on inventory, and the narrative drive to break free were perfected decades ago on the personal computer. Before we had physical locks and blacklights, we had the low-resolution screens of MS-DOS, teaching an entire generation how to think outside the box. These early games didn't just contain puzzles, they often were entire, lethal puzzle boxes designed to trap you and demand your complete attention.
When we talk about the escape room spirit in MS-DOS, we mean games where the environment itself is the primary antagonist. These aren't merely adventure games with puzzles. They are games where the movement is often restricted, the inventory is highly critical, and failure means immediate, often spectacular death or complete narrative deadlock. These DOS titles required players to meticulously map out their surroundings, often relying on paper notes to track clues that spanned the entire game move. The thrill came not from combat, but from realizing that the rusty key you found in 1987 must be used on the ornate lock you saw 2 years later, metaphorically speaking. Our journey must begin with the very origin point of graphical adventure. Though technically not a DOS game, its influence birthed the genre on the PC. That is Roberta Williams' 1980 title, Mystery House. This game established the fundamental premise. You are trapped in a mysterious house, presumably alone, and you must use command inputs to interact with objects and discover hidden secrets to escape the confines before a murderer finds you. It was pure confinement, inventory management, and high-stakes survival, defining the constraints that would drive adventure game design for the next 2 decades and serve as the blueprint for our digital escape experiences. In 1983, Sierra Online introduced King's Quest I, Quest for the Crown, to the IBM PC Junior, setting a new standard for graphical adventure. While sprawling, the narrative setup is fundamentally an escape scenario. King Edward is trapped, and the Kingdom of Daventry is locked in ruin. Sir Graham must navigate a land filled with dangerous creatures and obtuse inventory puzzles to reclaim 3 sacred artifacts. The pressure is immediate, requiring a methodical search of every screen, much like searching every corner of a locked room, to ensure you don't miss that single pixelated bean or magical shield necessary for later progression.
King's Quest I hammered home the idea of the lethal puzzle environment. Unlike modern, forgiving escape rooms, failure often resulted in instant death, forcing a reload. The true challenge was navigating the landscape without guidance, where simple actions like choosing the wrong path or talking to the wrong person could end your quest. The escape room feeling comes from the sheer desperation. You need to use the magic porridge on the gnome to receive the key item, but if you don't get the item immediately, you are perpetually locked out of the next stage of the puzzle chain. It required extremely precise sequencing.
Maniac Mansion, released in 1987, was the breakout title for Lucasfilm Games and the debut of the legendary Scum engine. This game elevated the escape concept by introducing multiple playable characters, each with unique abilities. The goal is simple: rescue Sandy from Dr. Fred's mansion, but the means are complex. The mansion is a giant, non-linear puzzle box. Players had to divide their teams, coordinating inventory usage between characters who might be locked in separate parts of the house, much like simultaneous puzzle solving in a physical escape room. What truly captures the escape room spirit in Maniac Mansion is the complex, sometimes timed, sequence breaking required to achieve one of the game's multiple endings. The game features hazards like the green tentacle, and players had to use items in precise locations and often within a limited time frame, such as using the coin in the washing machine before Nurse Edna catches you, or finding the hidden key in the painting before the meteor reveals itself. It was inventory management under high stress, turning the creepy house into a reactive environment demanding fast, logical solutions.
Originally a Mac Venture title, ported to DOS in 1988, Shadowgate puts you immediately into a perilous, confined location, a dark castle filled with deadly traps and mysteries. You are the last of a lineage, tasked with defeating the evil warlock lord. This first-person adventure is pure puzzle solving. Every room is a critical junction, and every action is a calculated risk. The game delights in punishing the player for small errors, often providing a darkly humorous description of your immediate demise. A perfect analogy for the failure state in a physical escape room, where one wrong move can reset the clock.
Shadowgate excelled at forcing players to examine every single pixel for clues. The interface, utilizing verbs like look, open, and use, made the environmental interaction central. You couldn't brute force your way through. You had to read the cryptic inscriptions, understand the purpose of every seemingly useless trinket, and figure out the exact sequence of levers needed to unlock the next corridor. Failing to light your torch or investigate a hidden rune meant being locked in darkness or walking into an invisible trap, turning the entire castle into one grand, interconnected sequence of deadly puzzles.
Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, released in 1990, blended adventure game inventory puzzles with true survival horror and RPG mechanics. Trapped in a haunted castle after your hostess, Elvira, is kidnapped, the player must gather spell components and weapons to survive. The escape room feeling here is intense due to the constant threat of enemy encounters, coupled with extremely limited inventory space. Players were forced to solve puzzles about logistics, which items to drop, which spells to prioritize, while navigating a dense map that locks off sections based on required keys or actions, mimicking a layered escape design. The heavy reliance on spell crafting in Elvira added an entire layer of combination lock puzzle design. To progress, you needed to find dozens of specific herbs and monster parts and combine them in precise, cryptic ways to create the protective or offensive spells needed to unlock a new area or defeat a specific guardian. This mechanic moved beyond simple key and door solving, demanding real lateral thinking, finding the hand of glory and knowing exactly which two other items to mix with it. A perfect early example of multi-step chemical puzzles now common in modern escape rooms.
The Secret of Monkey Island, also from 1990, stands out because it technically isn't about escaping a physical space, but rather escaping the limitations of logic itself. Guybrush Threepwood's quest to become a pirate involves three absurd, interconnected trials. LucasArts famously removed the instant death mechanic, but replaced it with puzzles of such recursive complexity that players often felt conceptually trapped. You needed specific items to complete the sword fighting, which required other items to distract key figures, leading to a long chain of object manipulation that felt like unlocking a series of sequential, humorous vaults.
Monkey Island solidified the contextual puzzle, a core escape room element. You don't just use a key on a lock, you use a rubber chicken with a pulley in the middle. The sheer joy of discovering these non-obvious combinations, like collecting grog in a specific delicate cup and knowing exactly when to use it before it melts the container, simulated the eureka moment of finding an obscure solution in a complicated room. The entire game was structured around unlocking the next step of the three trials, creating a giant, funny, multi-stage escape sequence designed to test patience and creativity.
In 1992, Alone in the Dark defined survival horror, but before the combat, it was a pure escape room. Edward Carnby, or Emily Hartwood, is immediately locked into the desolate Derceto mansion. The goal is simple: survive the night and escape the house. The majority of the early game focuses entirely on finding hidden passages, combining mundane objects like oil lamps and blankets, and solving complex environmental puzzles to open locked doors or evade immediate threats. This confined, labyrinthine house was the ultimate puzzle cage, where inventory management dictated survival.
Alone in the Dark created tension by blending resource scarcity with required puzzle solving. You couldn't just run and fight. Certain monsters could only be defeated by using specific items found through investigative puzzle solving, such as finding the specific book in the library required to open a hidden passageway, or knowing how to use a talisman to repel a spectral foe. The true escape lay in deciphering the house's history through documents and clues found in the environment, turning the mansion into a massive three-dimensional logic problem that must be solved before the horrors consume you.
Myst, released in 1993, is arguably the pinnacle of the digital escape room experience. Marooned on a quiet, abandoned island, players immediately grasp the confined nature of the game. There is no external help, no combat, and the inventory is minimal. The environment itself is the inventory.
Success depends entirely on manipulating complex machinery, deciphering cryptic notes, and recording environmental data to unlock subsequent ages. The Island of Myst is not a series of levels. It is one grand, interconnected lock requiring total non-verbal puzzle deduction.
Myst's brilliance lay in its non-linear deduction. Unlike earlier adventure games, the answers to the puzzles on Myst Island were often found in different ages or realms. For instance, the combination for a door on one island might be hidden in a cryptic sequence of sounds on another. This enforced heavy note-taking and lateral memory recall, replicating the multi-room approach of a high-end physical escape room, where clues from room A are necessary for the solution in room C. It demanded systemic thinking, locking players into a world built entirely on logical riddles.
Access Software's 1994 FMV opus Under a Killing Moon, starring Detective Tex Murphy, brought a cinematic scale to the puzzle genre. While it featured large explorable areas, the core escape experience came from Tex's meticulous approach to investigation. When faced with a locked compartment or a coded security system, the game required players to enter a detailed observation mode, combining clues from the environment with pieces of evidence gathered from interviews. The game wasn't just about finding items, it was about deductive reasoning within a highly confined narrative structure.
The mechanical puzzles in Under a Killing Moon were meticulously detailed, serving as true digital lockboxes. Players would encounter complex devices, hidden drawers, and sequential switch puzzles that demanded attention to auditory and visual cues. Successfully solving a puzzle often resulted in the opening of a massive hidden room or the revelation of a critical plot point. The satisfaction came from manually manipulating complex 3D environments to achieve the next stage of the investigation, locking the player into a sequence of technical challenges.
In 1995, Sierra introduced Shivers, a first-person adventure set almost entirely within the confines of the massive, haunted Museum of the Strange and Unusual. Trapped inside after a prank gone wrong, your task is to appease 13 restless spirits by finding and restoring their lost talismans, which are scattered throughout the sprawling, puzzle-laden building. This setup is the epitome of the find the required items to escape scenario, using the museum as a huge, segmented, and highly dangerous collection of locked boxes and cryptic clues.
Shivers incorporated heavy reliance on sound and visual layering, much like a modern multi-stage escape room. Each talisman was tied to a specific puzzle, requiring not just an item, but sometimes a sequence of musical notes or the correct alignment of symbols found in disparate wings of the museum. The layered nature of the puzzles, where unlocking the music room merely provided a clue for the ancient civilization's wing, trapped the player in a web of interconnected investigation that required comprehensive mapping and cross-referencing of every discovered clue.
The Neverhood, released in 1996, charmed players with its distinct claymation aesthetic, but masked some of the most complex sequential puzzle designs in adventure game history. As Clayman, you navigate the world of the Neverhood to save it. The confinement is psychological rather than physical, relying on unlocking massive sequential pathways. The environment often serves as the only source of clues, forcing players to interact with everything from giant motorized heads to complex pipe systems. It was a beautiful world, but one locked behind dozens of logic gates. The Neverhood's most infamous puzzle, the Hall of Records, epitomizes the ultimate test of patience and linear deduction. This corridor requires reading a ridiculously long sequence of history tablets, many of which contain seemingly irrelevant information, to find a tiny, critical piece of data needed for a single passcode later in the game. It wasn't about clever combinations. It was about rigorous, almost mandatory dedication to environmental reading, locking players into a literal narrative vault that could only be cracked by comprehensive attention to detail.
While slightly outside the hard DOS timeline, Riven, the sequel to Myst, launched in 1997, represented the evolutionary peak of the puzzle box environment, just as the DOS era transitioned fully to Windows. Riven took the confined, non-verbal design of Myst and amplified its complexity across 5 distinct islands. The level of observational detail required was astronomical,
demanding players to understand an entire alien culture's numbering system, geography, and architecture just to open a single door. It was an entire world built as a layered, logical sequence lock. Riven's greatest accomplishment was its use of visual ciphers and systemic interaction. Instead of just finding a lever, you had to understand the five-island transportation system, note the sounds of the various domes, and decode the complex Dinny numerical system to progress. The escape room feeling was profound because you weren't trying to escape a villain, you were trying to escape an incredibly dense, beautifully realized system of logic designed to keep outsiders from understanding its function. Only by fully integrating into the logic of the environment could you break free. These DOS-era masterpieces, spanning the text adventures of the early 80s to the full 3D environments of the late 90s, solidified the formula that defines modern escape rooms. They taught us the value of paranoia, that every piece of trash, every obscure note, and every broken mechanism might hold the key. They showed us the satisfaction of methodical deduction in a closed environment, often punishing failure harshly to raise the stakes. The digital prison of the DOS prompt provided the perfect petri dish for cultivating the thrill of the intellectual lock.
The early pioneers of MS-DOS gave us the tools and the templates for the ultimate confined challenge. They understood that the deepest sense of accomplishment comes not from defeating an enemy, but from outsmarting an environment. So the next time you're racing against the clock in a physical escape room, remember the cramped confines of those 16-color screens. The spirit of the adventure, the demand for observation, and the thrill of the breakthrough all began right there, locked away in an old DOS prompt.